Maddie Ford's car died on mile marker 114, and by the time the tow truck left her standing on the shoulder of I-70 with a duffel bag and a laptop case, I had already decided I was going to lie to my boss about how normal the next 2 days were going to be. My name is Ryan Hutchins. I'm 32. I manage regional accounts for a mid-sized logistics software company. And up until that Tuesday afternoon, my biggest problem in life was pretending I didn't care that Maddie Ford wore her hair down on days she felt confident and pinned up on days she didn't. That's the kind of detail you're not supposed to notice about a coworker. I noticed it anyway. I noticed a lot of things about Maddie Ford that I filed under things that don't matter, because they weren't supposed to matter, because she sat 2 desks down from me, because we had a standing rule at Hallbrook Systems that nobody dated inside the department after the incident with 2 account managers and a very public breakup in the parking garage. Nobody ever explained what the incident actually was. They just said it in a tone that made you not ask twice. I had been at Hallbrook for 6 years. Maddie had been there for 3. We weren't close, not in the way people mean when they say close. We were close. The kind of close where you know someone's coffee order, their conference call voice, the exact face they make when a client says the word synergy without irony. I knew Maddie could dismantle a bad presentation in 4 sentences without raising her voice. I knew she kept a granola bar in her top drawer for the days she forgot lunch. I knew she'd been engaged once, 2 years before I met her, and that the engagement had ended badly enough that nobody in the office brought it up. Not even the people who brought up everything. That Tuesday, our regional director, a woman named Carol Jennings who ran meetings like she was allergic to silence, had sent 6 of us to a logistics conference 3 hours away in Columbus. Budget cuts meant no company van this year, so we drove ourselves, staggered across 3 cars. I left the office at 11. Maddie left 20 minutes behind me in her 7-year-old sedan that made a sound under the hood I'd once jokingly compared to a dying accordion. She'd laughed and told me some men fix things and some men just narrate the ways things are broken, and which one was I? I told her I was aspirational. She said that was the least reassuring answer possible. I checked into the hotel around 2, dropped my bag, and was halfway through unpacking a garment bag I probably didn't need for a 2-day conference when my phone rang. Maddie's name on the screen, which was unusual because Maddie and I didn't really call each other. We texted about client folders and slacked about lunch orders. A call from Maddie felt like an event. "Hey," I said. "You lost already?" "The hotel's not that confusing." "Funny," she said, and her voice had an edge under it I didn't like. "My car just made a noise I've genuinely never heard a car make, and now there's steam coming out from under the hood, and I'm on the shoulder of a highway in the middle of absolutely nothing." I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. "Are you safe? Are you off the road?" "I'm off the road. I'm fine. I'm just," she exhaled, and I heard the wind through the phone, cars rushing past her at 70 miles an hour. "I'm stranded, Ryan." That's the update. I called a tow truck. They said 40 minutes, which in tow truck language probably means 90. I was already reaching for my keys before I'd fully decided to. "Where are you?" "Exact mile marker." "You don't have to come get me. I'll figure it out." "Maddie." "What?" "Mile marker." A pause. Then, quieter, like she was letting herself be rescued and hated how much relief was in it. She read me the number. I told Carol I'd forgotten something at a rest stop, which was a lie flimsy enough that I'm fairly sure nobody believed it. And I drove 40 minutes back down the highway with the radio off and my hazards flashing every time I passed a slower car, because apparently that was a thing I did when I was anxious. I found her sitting on the guardrail with her laptop bag between her feet like a bodyguard, hair pulled back, sunglasses on, looking more annoyed than scared, which tracked. Maddie Ford did not do scared where people could see it. She stood up when I pulled onto the shoulder behind her dead sedan. "You didn't have to do this." "I did actually. Company policy. Rescuing coworkers from the side of the highway is in the handbook. Page 40. It is not. It's in the spirit of the handbook." That got a small laugh out of her, tired but real. The tow truck showed up 12 minutes later, hooked up her car, and told her the shop could look at it the next morning at the earliest, which meant the sedan was staying in Columbus and Maddie was, for the foreseeable future, riding with me. She climbed into my passenger seat with her bags, buckled in, and looked over at me with an expression that was equal parts grateful and grim. "This is humiliating," she said. "It's a car breaking down. It happens to functioning adults constantly. It's humiliating because you're the one who found me on the side of the road looking like a woman in a true crime documentary's opening scene. For the record, you looked more annoyed than endangered. Very reassuring energy. Good. That's the brand I'm going for." We got back to the hotel a little after 4, and that was when the actual problem announced itself. The conference had booked out most of the property, and the front desk clerk, a young guy with a name tag that said Dylan and the expression of someone who had already had this exact conversation 4 times that day, informed Maddie that there were no more rooms. Not no more rooms in her price range. No more rooms, period. A regional sales convention had eaten the entire hotel alive, and the last room had gone to someone 20 minutes before she walked in. "There has to be something," Maddie said, in the calm, controlled voice of someone who was one sentence away from not being calm. "I'm really sorry," Dylan said, and he did look sorry, in the helpless way of a 22-year-old paid $18 an hour to be the face of corporate failure. "We're at capacity. There's another property about 40 minutes out, but I just checked, and they're also full because of the same conference." Maddie turned around and looked at me. I already knew what she was going to say before she said it, and I already knew what I was going to say back, and some small, honest part of me was aware that I had known this was a possible outcome the second I turned my car around on the highway, even if I hadn't let myself think it directly. "My room has 2 beds," I said. "Queen setup. I booked it that way because the conference rate was cheaper for doubles than singles, which makes no sense, but here we are." Maddie stared at me. "Ryan, I'm not saying it to be weird about it. I'm saying it because it's Tuesday, it's 4 in the afternoon, you have a conference to present at tomorrow morning, and your other option appears to be sleeping in a car that currently doesn't have an engine that works. People will talk. People already talk. Priya in accounting told someone I was dating a woman I met at a gas station because I once mentioned buying coffee at a gas station. That, finally, got a real laugh out of her, the kind that pulled her shoulders down from around her ears. She looked at Dylan, who was doing an admirable job of pretending not to listen to 2 coworkers negotiate an unplanned cohabitation in front of him. She looked back at me. "If this is weird," she said, "we say it's weird and we deal with it like adults." Deal. And you don't tell Derek. Derek Voss worked in our department too, 3 years younger than me. Technically my equal in rank, but constitutionally incapable of treating anything as equal. Derek had wanted Maddie's promotion last spring and hadn't gotten it, and ever since then he developed a habit of mentioning her name in meetings with a faint, curling tone that made it sound like an accusation. I didn't love Derek. I especially didn't love the version of Derek that existed inside conference room gossip. "I wasn't planning to file a report," I said. "But yeah, not a word. We got her a rollaway cot sent up as backup, more out of principle than necessity, and the hotel staff wheeled it into the room looking like a piece of furniture nobody had asked for, which nobody had." Maddie eyed it with the same suspicion she probably reserved for buffet seafood. "I am not sleeping on that," she said. "That looks like something they use to punish people in prison documentaries. There's 2 queen beds right there." "I know. I'm just establishing that the cot is not an option, in case you get any ideas about chivalry. I wasn't going to suggest it." "Good. Because I would have had to respect you less, and I already respect you an uncomfortable amount as it is." I didn't ask her what she meant by that. I filed it, the way I filed everything about Maddie Ford, under things that don't matter, and I knew even as I filed it that I was lying to myself about the folder it belonged in. We ordered room service that night because neither of us had the energy to walk down to the hotel restaurant and perform normalcy in front of 5 other coworkers from Hallbrook who were staying on the same floor. Maddie sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop, running through her slides for the next morning's presentation on regional fulfillment metrics, muttering corrections to herself under her breath. I sat on mine, half watching a baseball game with the sound low, half watching her, which I was getting worse at hiding by the hour. "You keep looking at me like I'm going to combust," she said, not glancing up from her screen. "I'm making sure you're not about to combust. Your presentation face is very intense." "My presentation face is my only face. I don't have a spare. That explains a lot of meetings." She threw a hotel pillow at me without looking up, which I caught, which she seemed almost disappointed by. We fell into an easy rhythm after that, the kind that surprised me with how easy it was, given that 4 hours earlier she'd been stranded on a highway shoulder and I'd been folding a garment bag I didn't need. She told me about the fulfillment numbers she was worried about, the client in Toledo who kept changing the terms of a contract at the last minute, the intern who'd accidentally sent an internal memo to an external client list and caused a small departmental panic. I told her about my sister's twins, about the house I was slowly, badly renovating on weekends, about the fact that I'd once tried to make sourdough during a period of my life I preferred not to discuss, and had produced something closer to a doorstop. Somewhere around 10, the conversation drifted somewhere neither of us had steered it, the way conversations do at 10 at night in a hotel room, when two people have run out of safe topics and are too tired to keep manufacturing new ones. "Can I ask you something?" Maddie said, closing her laptop, "and you don't have to answer if it's weird." "Sure. Why'd you turn the car around?" "On the highway. You could have just told me to call a tow truck and handle it myself." Most people would have. I thought about lying, about saying something breezy and deflecting, the kind of answer that kept things at the level we'd always kept them at. I didn't, because it didn't occur to me not to. I said, "I know that's not a very interesting answer. I heard your voice on the phone and it had that thing in it, the thing where you're trying to sound fine and you're not quite fine, and I was already grabbing my keys before I decided to grab them." Maddie was quiet for a second. "That's a better answer than most people give. Most people give bad answers." "No," she said. "Most people give safe answers. That one wasn't safe. I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't do anything with it." And we let the silence sit there until it stopped being uncomfortable and started being something else, something warmer, something I wasn't ready to name out loud in a hotel room on a work trip with 2 queen beds and an unwanted rollaway cot standing in the corner like a chaperone neither of us had asked for. The next morning, the conference swallowed us whole the way conferences do, back-to-back sessions, name badges, bad coffee, and better cups than it deserved. Maddie's presentation went well. I watched from the third row and felt an entirely disproportionate amount of pride watching her handle a hostile question from a regional director in Cincinnati without losing an ounce of composure. Afterward, in the hallway, Derek Voss found us both at the same time, which felt less like coincidence and more like a man who'd been listening for exactly this kind of opportunity. "Big fan of the joint room situation," he said, grinning in the specific way he grinned when he thought he was being charming instead of exhausting. "Didn't realize Hallbrook covered that kind of team bonding." "Her car broke down." "Derek," I said. "The hotel was full. It's not a plot twist." Sure. He held both hands up, all mock innocence. "I'm just saying, people are going to talk." "People are always going to talk," Maddie said, her voice flat and even. "Doesn't mean they're going to be right." Derek's smile flickered, just slightly, the way it did whenever Maddie didn't give him the reaction he was fishing for. He wandered off toward the coffee station, already composing whatever version of this story he was going to tell in the break room on Monday, and Maddie watched him go with an expression I couldn't quite read. "He's going to say something," she said. "Probably. Does that bother you?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "It bothers me that he'll make it sound cheap. It doesn't bother me that people will know we shared a room, because we didn't do anything to be ashamed of." Maddie looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to trust that sentence. "No," she said slowly. "We didn't." That afternoon, between sessions, Maddie's phone buzzed on the table in the hotel lobby where we were grabbing coffee before the next panel, and I watched her face change the second she saw the name on the screen. Something closed off in her, fast, like a door someone had practiced shutting. "You okay?" "Fine," she said, in the too quick way people say fine when they mean the opposite. She silenced the call and set the phone face down. Maddie, it's nothing. Old stuff. I didn't push, because pushing wasn't my job and I knew it wasn't my job. But the phone buzzed again 10 minutes later, and this time she picked it up, walked a few steps away toward the window, and answered in a low, tight voice I hadn't heard from her before. I caught pieces. No, I'm working. No, that's not. I told you not to call me during conferences. I'm hanging up now. When she came back to the table, her hands were faintly unsteady around her coffee cup, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. That was Trevor, she said finally, like the name cost her something to say out loud. I didn't know a Trevor. Who's Trevor? My ex-fiancé. She said it flatly, like she was reading it off a form. We were together 4 years. Engaged for one of them. It ended 2 years ago, badly, and he has never fully accepted the ended part. He calls you? Still? Every few weeks. Sometimes it's an apology. Sometimes it's an accusation. Sometimes it's both in the same call, which is a genuinely impressive skill, honestly. She tried to make it sound like a joke and didn't quite land it. He saw on some mutual friends' page that I was traveling for work this week and apparently decided that meant I owed him an explanation of my location. That's not normal. I know that. Her voice had an edge now, tired more than angry. I know that, Ryan. I've known that for 2 years. Knowing it doesn't make the call stop. I didn't say anything right away because I could tell she wasn't looking for me to fix it. She was looking for someone to just sit in it with her for a second without flinching. So I did that. I sat there while she collected herself, while her hands steadied around the coffee cup, while the conference hallway filled back up with the low roar of 600 people pretending to be interested in supply chain optimization. For what it's worth, I said eventually, you don't owe him your location. You don't owe him anything. I know. I mean it. Whatever he says on those calls, whatever guilt he's trying to hand you, you don't have to carry it just because he keeps offering. Maddie looked at me then, really looked, the same way she'd looked at Derek earlier, except there was nothing guarded in it this time. You say things like that very easily. I mean them easily. That's different from saying them easily. That night, back in the room, the atmosphere was different than the night before, softer in some ways and heavier in others. Maddie changed out of her conference clothes into leggings and an old college sweatshirt, sat on her bed with her knees pulled up, and after a while, without me asking, she started talking about Trevor properly, the way people talk about things they've rehearsed keeping quiet. He wasn't a bad person when we met, she said. That's the part people don't believe. He was funny, and he paid attention, and for the first year it felt like being seen for the first time in my life. Then it turned into something else. Slowly. So slowly, I didn't notice the turn until I was already most of the way through it. What changed? He started needing to know where I was. Not out of care. Out of control, but it wore care's clothes for a long time, so I didn't clock it. He didn't like my friends. He didn't like when I got praised at work, said it made him feel small, which somehow became my problem to manage. By the end, I was smaller than I've ever been in my life, and I didn't even notice I'd shrunk until I got out and looked back at the shape of the person I used to be. I sat very still, the way you sit still when someone is handing you something fragile and doesn't want it commented on yet, just held. I left 2 weeks before the wedding, she said. Everyone thought I was insane. My own mother thought I was insane for about 6 months until she saw what I looked like a year later, and then she stopped thinking that. You're not insane. I know. Now. It took a while. She looked at me, something right threading through the sadness. You're very easy to talk to. That's inconvenient. Inconvenient how? Because I've spent 2 years telling myself I don't want to be easy to know again. And here you are, being easy to talk to, in a hotel room, at 10 p.m. after my car exploded. Your car didn't explode. It made a concerning noise and produced steam. You're missing my point on purpose. A little, I admitted. Because I don't entirely know what to do with your point yet. Maddie laughed, soft and surprised, like she hadn't expected me to admit that. That's fair. We didn't cross any lines that night. We talked until almost midnight, about smaller things again, safer things, the way people do when they've gone somewhere deep and need to come back up for air before they can go there again. But something had shifted, the kind of shift you can't undo once it happens, the kind where you both know a door has opened even if neither of you has walked through it yet. Before any of that, though, there was breakfast. We went down together around 7, before most of the conference crowd had surfaced, and grabbed a corner table near the window where the light was doing that early, forgiving thing it does in hotel restaurants, making even the sad little buffet pastries look almost appealing. Maddie ordered black coffee and picked at a bowl of fruit like she was still deciding whether her stomach could handle the day. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, face down on the table, like she expected it to buzz again even though it hadn't yet. "You don't have to keep bracing for it," I said. "Old habit," she admitted. "You spend enough years waiting for a call that ruins your morning, and your body doesn't really believe you when you tell it the ruining might not come." Fair enough. I passed her the little dish of butter she'd been silently eyeing for her toast. "For what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere if it does come." She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, something soft moving behind her eyes. "You say that like it's simple. I don't think it's simple. I think it's just true, which isn't always the same thing as simple. That's a very tidy distinction for 7 in the morning. I peaked early today. It's downhill from here." She laughed, and for a few minutes we just ate breakfast like two ordinary people on an ordinary work trip, talking about nothing important, the conference schedule, whether the keynote speaker's tie had been a genuine fashion choice or a cry for help, whether hotel coffee ever actually tasted good, or whether everyone had simply agreed to pretend. It was easy in a way that surprised me. Not easy like nothing was happening underneath it. Easy like something real had finally stopped hiding. Around the time we were finishing up, a woman from the Cincinnati office named Renata stopped by our table on her way to the buffet, glanced between the two of us with open curiosity, and said, not unkindly, "So you two are the ones who got stuck sharing a room." I heard it was a whole thing. Maddie set her coffee down with the calm precision of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 days, that she was done shrinking for other people's stories. "It was a whole thing," she said. "The thing was, my car broke down and the hotel ran out of rooms. Very dramatic stuff. I'm thinking of pitching it to a network." Renata laughed, a little surprised by the directness, and wandered off toward the buffet without further comment, which felt like a small victory in itself. One more sign that Maddie had stopped letting Derek's version of events be the only version in circulation. "You handled that well," I said once she'd gone. "I've had a lot of practice handling versions of my life that other people tell wrong," Maddie said, and there was an edge under it, tired rather than bitter. "It's a skill you build whether you want to or not." I didn't push on that. Not right then, though I filed it away, the way I'd been filing things about her for a year, except now the folder had a different label, one that said "This matters, say something about it later," instead of "Pretend you didn't notice." Derek had apparently spent the previous evening turning his lobby joke into a fuller narrative, because by the time Maddie and I walked into the general session together, a few too many people glanced over with the particular expression coworkers get when they think they know something. Carol Jennings, our director, caught me near the coffee station before the first session and asked, in the carefully neutral tone she used for things that weren't actually neutral, whether there was anything she should know about the room situation. "Her car broke down," I said, for what felt like the 40th time in 2 days. The hotel was full. I offered the second bed in my room instead of letting a coworker sleep in a dead sedan on the side of a highway. That's the entire story. Carol studied me for a second, the way directors study you when they're deciding whether to believe you or just decide it isn't worth the trouble of not believing you. "Fine," she said. "Just be aware people are talking. I'd rather it not become a thing before quarterly reviews." Understood. It should have ended there. It didn't, because that afternoon, during a break between sessions, Maddie's phone rang again, and this time she didn't step away to take it quietly. This time Trevor's voice came through loud enough that a couple of people near us in the lobby turned their heads, and I watched Maddie's face go through several stages of controlled fury in the span of about 10 seconds. "No," she said into the phone, sharp now, done pretending to be patient. I am not discussing this with you here. I told you I'm at a work conference. Muffled words on the other end, angry ones from the tone of it, though I couldn't make out specifics. Because it's none of your business who I'm rooming with, Maddie said, and I felt my stomach drop, because that meant somewhere along the way, someone, Derek, almost certainly Derek, had said something to somebody that had eventually, through whatever chain of mutual acquaintances existed between our office and Maddie's old life, made its way to Trevor. More muffled words, and then Maddie's voice cracked, just slightly. The first time I'd heard it crack in 2 days of watching her handle everything from stranded highways to hostile conference questions without flinching. That is not, Trevor, that is not what's happening. And even if it were, it would not be your concern anymore. You don't get to still have opinions about my life. She hung up. Her hand was shaking around the phone. I stepped closer, not touching her, just present. He knows about the room, I said. It wasn't a question. Somebody told him. Her voice was thin. I don't even know who. Someone from your office, probably, mentioned it to someone, who mentioned it to someone else, and now my ex-fiancé thinks he has the right to call me at a work conference and interrogate me about who I'm sleeping 4 feet away from. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that. She pressed the heel of her hand against one eye, hard, the universal gesture of a person refusing to cry in a hotel lobby. I know that, Ryan, but knowing it and having to defend it to a man who spent 2 years making me feel small for existing wrong are two very different exhausting things. I looked around the lobby, at the handful of Hallbrook colleagues still lingering near the registration table, at Derek in particular, who was very studiously checking his phone in a way that told me he knew exactly what had just happened and was choosing not to look at us. Derek, I said, and my voice came out harder than I meant it to, which was to say exactly as hard as I meant it to. He looked up, doing an unconvincing impression of surprise. What? Did you say something to someone about the room situation? Something that could have gotten back to her ex? I mentioned it to a couple people. It's not a secret, Ryan. You two are literally standing here together at every session. There's a difference between people noticing something and you narrating it to anyone who'll listen until it turns into a story ugly enough to reach a man who has no business knowing anything about her life anymore. Derek's jaw tightened. I didn't call the guy. I don't even know who he is. No, Maddie said, stepping forward, her voice steadier now, the fury cooling into something colder and more precise. But you told the story like it was gossip worth spreading, and gossip finds its way places you don't intend, because that's what gossip does. You wanted people to talk about this, Derek. Congratulations. They did. The lobby had gone quieter around us, the way lobbies do when they sense a scene forming. Derek looked between the two of us, some calculation happening behind his eyes about whether to double down or retreat, and for a second I thought he might actually apologize. I think you're both being dramatic, he said instead, and walked off toward the escalators, which told me everything I needed to know about the calculation he'd landed on. Maddie let out a long breath, watching him go. I hate that he's going to make this into a story about me being difficult, she said. That's always how it goes. I set a boundary, and somehow I'm the one who becomes the problem. You're not the problem, I said. You never were the problem, not with Derek, and not with Trevor either. She looked at me, something exhausted and grateful moving across her face at once. You keep saying things like that, because they keep being true. That evening, we skipped the closing dinner. Neither of us had the energy to sit through another round of forced networking with Derek somewhere in the room recalibrating his story, and Trevor's calls had left Maddie rattled in a way she was trying hard not to show and not quite managing. We ordered pizza instead, ate it sitting on the floor of the hotel room with our backs against the beds because neither of us wanted to be that formal about it. And somewhere around the second slice, Maddie set hers down and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, something unguarded and a little scared. Can I tell you something, and you promise not to make it weird? I make everything weird. It's kind of my thing. Ryan. Sorry. Yes. I promise. She turned toward me slightly, pulling one knee up. I think part of why Trevor's calls got to me so much today wasn't really about him. It was that somewhere in the last 2 days, I started wanting something I told myself I wasn't allowed to want yet, and hearing his voice made me feel like I was doing something wrong just by wanting it. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest. What do you want? She held my eyes for a long moment, longer than either of us usually allowed conversations to sit before deflecting into a joke. I think you know. I want to hear you say it. That feels like a lot of pressure for a woman who's eaten 4 slices of hotel pizza off a paper plate on a hotel carpet. Take your time. Maddie laughed, but it was shaky, and underneath the laugh was something more serious trying to get out. I like you, she said finally, plainly, like the sentence had been sitting behind her teeth for longer than 2 days. I've liked you for longer than 2 days, if I'm honest, which I'm apparently being now for some reason. I told myself it didn't matter because of the department rule, and because I wasn't ready, and because you were you and I was. Whatever version of me survived Trevor. But then my car broke down, and you turned around on a highway without even thinking about it, and I don't know. It got harder to keep telling myself it didn't matter. I set my own paper plate down, very carefully, like the room might shatter if I moved too fast. I like you too, I said. I've liked you for about a year, honestly, and I've spent that entire year filing it under things that don't matter because I didn't think it was allowed to matter. Watching you handle the last 2 days, though, the car, the conference, Derek, Trevor, I don't think I can keep filing it there anymore. Maddie was quiet for a second, and then, slowly, she reached over and took my hand, just held it. Nothing more, like she wanted to test whether the moment would hold weight before she trusted it with anything heavier. I don't want to rush this, she said. I did rush things once before, and I paid for years for the rushing. We don't have to rush anything. I mean it. I want to actually date you. Outside a hotel room. Without a car breaking down as the excuse. Then we will, I said. Excuse-free. I'll even drive separately next time, just to prove the point. That got the real laugh out of her, the one that pulled her whole face open. And for a second, sitting there on a hotel room floor with cold pizza and a rollaway cot nobody had used standing awkwardly in the corner, I felt something settle into place that I hadn't realized had been unsettled for a very long time. We didn't kiss that night. We talked until almost 1 in the morning instead, slower and easier than either of the 2 nights before, filling in years of things we'd noticed about each other and never said out loud. And when we finally fell asleep, it was in our separate beds, a few feet of hotel carpet, and an entire unspoken agreement between us. And somehow that felt like exactly the right amount of distance for exactly where we were. The drive back to the office 2 days later was different than the drive out had been. Maddie's car was still in the shop, waiting on a part, so she rode with me the whole way, and around the halfway mark, somewhere past a rest stop with a gas station shaped vaguely like a covered wagon, she reached over without announcing it and laced her fingers through mine on the console between us. Neither of us said anything about it. We didn't need to. Back at the office, Derek's version of the story had, predictably, made its rounds, dressed up in exactly the tone he'd wanted it dressed up in, but Maddie handled it the way she handled everything, directly and without apology. When Priya from accounting asked her, half joking, half fishing, whether anything had happened in Columbus, Maddie just said, "Yes, actually. I'm seeing Ryan now. Feel free to spread that instead. It's more accurate," and walked back to her desk like she'd just filed a routine expense report. Carol Jennings called us both into her office the following week. Mostly, it turned out, as a formality, to remind us of the department's policy and to ask, not unkindly, whether we intended to keep things professional at work. We told her we did. We meant it. We kept our hands to ourselves in meetings and our inside jokes down to a controlled minimum. And if anyone noticed that I'd started leaving my desk more often around the time Maddie usually took her afternoon coffee break, nobody said anything worth repeating. Trevor called twice more over the next month. The second time, Maddie didn't answer at all, and the time after that, the call simply stopped, which I like to think had less to do with him finally understanding a boundary and more to do with Maddie finally, fully, stopping caring whether he understood it or not. She told me once, months later, that the moment she really let go of any leftover guilt about leaving him wasn't the day she moved out or the day she filed the paperwork, but a random Tuesday evening on a highway shoulder, watching my car pull up behind her dead sedan without a second of hesitation. That's when I knew what it was supposed to feel like, she said. Someone showing up without making it a whole production about it. Just showing up because it didn't occur to them not to. We got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at a lake house her parents rented for the weekend, and Derek, somewhat improbably, was invited, mostly because Maddie said she'd rather have him there being awkward in a suit than not there giving people something else to gossip about. At the reception, during the toasts, my sister stood up with a glass of wine and told the whole story: the highway, the steam under the hood, the rollaway cot nobody had used, and the entire room laughed in that warm, knowing way rooms laugh when a story has already earned its happy ending. Maddie found me afterward near the edge of the dance floor, tugging gently at my tie, the same wry look on her face she'd had the first night in that hotel room when she'd told me the cot wasn't an option. You know, she said, your sister left out the part where you drove 40 minutes down a highway before I'd even finished explaining what the noise sounded like. That part's not as good of a story. It's my favorite part, she said. It's the part where I found out what kind of person you actually were before either of us had the nerve to say anything about it out loud. I pulled her closer, out there on a dance floor lit up with string lights over a lake neither of us had ever seen before that weekend, and thought about how strange it was that a dying sedan on the side of I-70 had ended up being the thing that changed the entire shape of my life. Sometimes it isn't the big, dramatic moments that rearrange everything. Sometimes it's a car breaking down on a Tuesday afternoon, a hotel with one room left, and a rollaway cot that never once got used. So tell me, what would you have done if your coworker's car broke down on a work trip and the only room left had 2 beds instead of 1? And have you ever had an ordinary, inconvenient moment turn out to be the beginning of something you never saw coming? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.